Well, I'm joined now by Jason Stanley. He's a philosophy professor at Yale University. He's joining us tonight from New York City. His latest book is Erasing History: How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. He's also the author of How Fascism Works: The Politics of Us and Them. Professor, it's good to have you back on the program. I want to ask you, how do you interpret this deployment of the military by the U.S. president against the wishes of the state of California?
So it's really important to note that these protests are very small and nonviolent, except for throwing stones, maybe overturning a car. But these are small protests. So it's utterly absurd to send the National Guard in, and it's completely unprecedented to send the Marines in. We're talking about sending soldiers, elite soldiers from the most powerful military on earth, against a few hundred protesters, civilian protesters in a United States city. This is against the law. It's unprecedented, and it's flexing by the U.S. government, by the Trump regime. It's showing Americans that Trump can do whatever he wants.
What do you think about the way that ICE is being deployed to round up people who may or may not be in the country illegally?
Well, fear is the lifeblood, the fuel of fascist political movements and fascist regimes or authoritarian regimes. These videos that are spreading all over social media of ICE in unmarked vans stuffing people into these vans, so sweeping people off the street, they're meant to inspire fear and terror. And they're doing so. And now ICE is doing workplace raids. They're promising to remove 11 million immigrants from our country. You can't do that without violence. You can't do that without terror. We're going to have safe houses all across the country filled with immigrants. And we're going to have generally a mood of fear.
Mm. The mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, she was asked about the presence of the National Guard and Marines in her city. This is what she had to say.
Didn't need the National Guard. Why on earth? What are they going to do? Do you know what the National Guard is doing now? They are guarding two buildings. They're guarding the federal building here in downtown, and they're guarding the federal building in Westwood. That's what they're doing. So they need Marines on top of it? I don't understand that. That's why I feel like we are part of an experiment that we did not ask to be a part of.
Professor, she used the word experiment. What experiment do you think is she talking about?
Well, there's multiple experiments. One is a flex to show what's going to happen if anyone goes on the street to protest. So whether it's students protesting U.S. support for Israel's war in Gaza, whether it's people protesting Trump's own policies, whether it's people protesting these horrific ICE raids on workplaces, protests will be met to the severest degree possible with the force of the U.S. military. So that's the first thing. The second thing is Trump is experimenting with a kind of enabling act kind of move. He did this already in October 2020 when he threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act against Black Lives Matter protesters. So this is something familiar. This is something that he's wanted to do in the past and will enable him to take emergency powers. So this sort of exaggerating of the protests is an attempt to create the sense that there's a national emergency, which will enable him to bypass any remaining checks and balances.
And yet the latest poll, I think it was a CBS poll out earlier today, shows that 54% of Americans are in favor of the president's stance on immigration. So how do you explain this? Is he doing what the American people want him to do?
Well, there is, of course, illiberal democracy, right? I mean, I think once you set out for people, however, what this kind of immigration, these kind of immigration raids mean and will mean, support will drop. So a general kind of close the southern border, that is supported by the majority of Americans. But do Americans really support swarms of ICE agents going into invading the local Home Depot? Do they really support the kinds of actions that will be necessary to remove 11 million people in the United States and put them in deportation camps? I think the support for those kind of actions will go down. There's a lot of ignorance of what this would actually in practice mean.
Do you think this goes beyond Donald Trump? I mean, could we be looking at something that is precedent-setting now for a future where we see conflicts between the federal government, its authority, over states and their authority?
Of course, that's the goal here. The goal is kind of to replicate what the federal government did with threats to Black Americans in the South, where they also and desegregation efforts, where they also intervened in states. So there's kind of a sense of humor here about like doing to northern states what was done to southern states in the face of desegregation efforts. So, but beyond that, yeah, what we have is an attempt to fully take over states from a kind of vertical power, as Masha Gessen puts it, stand perspective, where the president the president or the king, as it were, is able to impose his will regardless of any state resistance. The goal is to crush the blue states.
You know, we've heard for decades now that the U.S. needs immigration reform, but Congress has failed to make that happen. What does these scenes of chaos in Los Angeles, what do they tell us about the future if Americans want regulated immigration into their country?
Well, there is no chaos in Los Angeles. There are a few small protests, and the chaos is created by sending the elite troops, the most powerful military in the world, into Los Angeles. So, but yes, I mean, you ask a great question. What are Americans going to do when they see in practice what this kind of mass removal means? You can't have mass removal of people without terror and violence. And we're going to see in the future, indeed in the near future, Americans' reactions to this kind of manifest cruelty that we're going to be witnessing on our television screens. And I hope the response will be empathy, but I fear it will just be more cruelty.
You know, we have heard more and more in the public arena, the word fascism or fascist in the United States. You know, you and I, we spoke earlier this year about your decision to leave the U.S. out of your concern for your children as well as for your career. You were attacked on social media for this. I think even the pollster Nate Silver said that your decision was performative and that as a privileged Yale professor, he said the honorable thing to do would be to stay put and to fight for democracy. What do you say to that now with a little bit of time on your side?
I mean, it's a global fight, right? So moving to Canada, makes no difference to that global fight. I mean, we have AfD and the Trump regime working together, I believe. I think one needs to see this as a global fight. I think the kind of local, parochial viewpoint that we have in the United States misses that fact. But in general, I knew that I was going to draw fire for this decision. I don't necessarily even want to leave the United States. And to say it's performative, well, yeah, it's part of it is to say, look, the intellectuals are now leaving the United States. But I knew I was going to draw fire. You can't do a political message without drawing fire. And maybe, if the political message was problematic in certain ways, that's just the nature of things. You take a risk when you make a public statement.
Professor Jason Stanley, Professor, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us from inside the United States still. Thank you.
Thank you.